Good morning. I'm very excited to speak to you this morning. Firstly, it's because today is actually the 22nd anniversary of my baptism date. And I actually told Beng Chuan that I wanted to preach on 16th of August because he gave me a list. And I was like, okay, I think this is a good occasion. And I think secondly, more importantly, is that I think in this time of COVID-19, this message that I would like to speak to the church is really most apt because it talks about trials and tribulations based on what we have, Brother Peter have read in Exodus 16, or rather to be more specific, from Exodus 15 to 18, whereby we see that trials and tribulations are part of our life, and the solution is to trust and obey. So this is really the gist of my message today, and I pray to God that I'll be able to speak to everyone and to be able to get to the gist of it and to change our lives and the way that we will approach life in this new normal. So, the analogy of Israel's wandering in the desert. So in my perspective, the exodus of Israel from Egypt to the promised land, which is Canaan, is very similar to the story of a Christian's life on earth. Through the Red Sea, so this is in the context of Exodus 14, through the Red Sea, one is baptized in the waters, right? And when we read more in the book of Exodus itself and later on in Deuteronomy, when troubles arise, Israel has two options. First, go to God. And always, a victory will result as a result of going to God. No matter what, God will still provide, even if He scolds them, rebukes them, etc. He will still provide the victory at the end of the day. Second option is if Israel chooses to rely on themselves. And we read in the Bible that this typically leads to total destruction. Destruction meaning death. Or at best, they will suffer. They will suffer boils, they'll suffer tumors, what have you. They will suffer. But it is as a result of them relying on themselves. Relying on themselves also could mean that they rely on perhaps a golden calf that they created when Moses was up in the mountains. Or they want to think for themselves without relying on God. So when that happens, they will get into trouble themselves. But whatever the case, God always provides the way out, right? It only depends on whether Israel believes that God will provide. And that belief is the depth of faith that Israel has. And if I liken it to today, it is pretty much the same as well. How is our depth of our faith that we have, that we can believe that God will always provide the way out? So in the next few slides and in the next 3 chapters, if you're flipping through your Bible at the moment, I'll be talking on Exodus 15 to 17. And we will really study in detail how God will always provide a way out. And the onus is on Israel to believe that God will indeed provide. So, as I mentioned earlier, Israel has just crossed the Red Sea. And this was a miracle, right? Israel saw that the waters of the Red Sea parted. This is like even impossible today. How do you part an entire sea to the left and to the right? And there was absolute dry ground. And Israel walked through that dry ground, right? And it's not for 10 meters, 100 meters, not even 1 kilometer. It is a few kilometers, right? Or not a few, a great number of kilometers across the entire sea. And more importantly, as they looked back, they saw that the waters rolled back and destroyed the pursuing Egyptian army. So they have just witnessed a great miracle where God has just delivered them on His own. There was no doing whatsoever from Israel. Israel didn't throw even a single stone at the Egyptians, right? They didn't even do anything. It was God on His own who did everything. And so Israel sang a song of praise in Exodus 15. It's quite a lengthy passage in Exodus 15, and they marvel at the work that they have witnessed and the miracle they have experienced. And so this is perhaps the joy and jubilation level that they had upon crossing the Red Sea. And they had I will say a honeymoon period for 3 days. Because it is written, after 3 days, Israel came to a place called Marah, and they found some water and they were thirsty and they decided to drink. And they said, this water is really bitter. Which I guess, it just tasted funny. Maybe recently in Singapore we had the pandan smell in our water, right? So, these were little things that caused them to be alarmed. And so they complained. I guess they didn't really complain too ferociously or strongly. It was more of like a, hey Moses, water is bitter, so how? So Moses, okay, fine, let me go to God. And God said, well, put this tree into the water, it will be sweet. And so he did that. And as a result of all this event itself, God then reminds God reminds Israel to obey and to keep his statutes, and he will never be ill, for God is the healer. Right? So it doesn't matter whether the water is bitter or whatever taste that it is. If you have the trust in God, right, you will never be ill, and God will heal us. So the immediate learnings from Exodus 15 is perhaps when we were first baptized. So for me, 22 years ago to the day, I can't remember if I really did have a week of sinless, going without sin. But I believe that at the point of baptism, I really did tell myself, don't sin, Jason, please don't sin. Right? And it's probably in my mind for, I would say a few days. But after that, of course, right, you start to slip away, you start to recount of the good old days, inverted commas. And the tribulations come. Now, tribulations, what I checked on Google and on the Webster Dictionary is, it defines as suffering, right? Trials are a form of test. Tribulations are suffering, right? So these first few tribulations as a Christian will come soon enough. In this case, for the Israelites, they had to contend with bitter water, right? But I guess in Exodus 15, God didn't scold them immediately, right? I mean, he just said, okay, fine, let me just give you the sweet water that you wanted. So I guess for the parents out there, you can imagine you have a newborn child, or not say a newborn, maybe a little toddler who doesn't really understand much, and he complains that his milk is not warm, not hot. Then, you don't scold him like, hey, why can't you drink a cold milk, right? You just say, okay, fine, let me just fix the problem, right? So perhaps this is the initial stages in Exodus 15. So far, so good, right? God hears and God saves. Then we come to Exodus 16, right? 15th day of the second month, roughly about 45 days. It's quite a lengthy while already, of wandering around in the wilderness, right? Wilderness where there's absolute nothingness, and I guess it's a desert, so hot in the day, cold in the night. And of course, the difficulty increases. And as it increases, the doubts about God grows. And I guess if they have been, picking berries along the way, or eating whatever that they have that they took out from Egypt, and I guess the food ran out, right? So it come to a point where they now complain about hunger, and some of them even spoke of regretting leaving Egypt, where we might recall they were actually slaves in Egypt, but because of their hunger, the physical pain that they are suffering, they actually considered why did God even take them out of Egypt to make them suffer, right? So God hears the cries again, and as we read just now, he prepares for manna and quail for the people. Specifically for the manna, he sets out a test, right? It's written that he sets out a test, and he instructs them on two matters. Number one, take only what you need for the day, each day. Okay, take only what you need for the day, each day. And on the sixth day, you double that, what you actually pick for the seventh, which is a Sabbath. Right? So these are just two simple rules that he set. right? Just take what you need for the day each day, and on the 6th day, just take double. Pretty simple, right? No, of course not, right? Israel didn't listen. Israel didn't obey. Some of them were in Singlish, they were kiasu, which means they don't like to lose, and they want to be greedy, and they want to look after their own selves. So they took too much. On the first day, they took too much. They couldn't finish, and they left the manna overnight. Worms came, and the expired manna stank. How stinky it was, I wouldn't know, but if you have, let's say, expired fish or smelly socks, I think it's probably to that level. And of course, they had to suffer the smell of the expired manna. On the 7th day, some of the Israelites also decided to go out and find some manna, right? And of course, God has already said there was none. And so the Lord rebuked them through Moses for not keeping the law. Because very simply, God said, on the 6th day, please take double. The Israelites did that. Please bake, boil, whatever you do, prepare for the 7th. They also did that. So why was there still a need to go out on the 7th to collect more manna? Right? There was really no need. But they still did it. So this really reflects the Israelites, I guess, low level of faith in God, and perhaps how they perceive that they should be taking care of themselves in the wilderness where there was absolutely nothing. A point to note here that Israel, in verse 35 of chapter 16, Israel ate manna for the entire duration when they were in the wilderness, every single day, until they were at the border of Canaan. So if we cross-reference this to our own selves today, it's really likened to what we read, or we have seen earlier on, the bread of life. The bread of life, as written in Psalms, where it says that this bread sustains us, right? This bread sustains us and gives us that life that we will need, especially when we are in a wilderness with nothing. We have to learn to rely on God, because if we rely on ourselves, we probably end up eating sand and drinking our own saliva, right? But if we rely on God, then things will be very different. It is mentioned in verse 16 that the manna actually tasted with like honey in wafers, honey wafers. Actually, when I was preparing this lesson, I became very hungry upon reading this statement, because it's like, wow, I mean, really good, right? Wafers and honey, and in the middle of the desert, right? This really tasted really good. So, quick learnings from Exodus 16. The life of a Christian is never going to be easy. Suffering is a process that we have to be ordered to complete. So let me read to you James chapter 1, verse 2 to 4. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. Right? The testing of your faith produces patience. And let patience has its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Right? So the key points here. Why are we being tested? It's because this is a process to make us perfect and complete. If the exodus from Egypt to the promised land could have been done by boat, for example, right? You can go along the Mediterranean. Simple, I don't know. I mean, maybe during those days, one week trip, or even less, a few days of boat ride, you could reach, no problem. But would you have learned the lessons of relying on God? No. So the Exodus was needed in order to teach the Israelites to rely on God. Same thing. For Christians, the life of a Christian is never going to be easy. If the moment we are baptized and we go to heaven, it's a immediate process. We don't learn how to rely on God. We still rely on ourselves, our old selves. We not get the process of being perfect and complete, right? So I would like to stress on this point, because this is an important one as we go on later. So another lesson from Exodus 16. Through the entire process itself, we see that God provides the way out. So in the wilderness, as one can imagine, in the desert, when there's absolute nothing, I don't know, rock, stone, sand, right? And maybe one cloud in the sky. How would you find water? How would you find bread or much worse, meat, right? There's no animal around for you to hunt and to kill. There's absolutely nothing. But what did God do? God rained down manna, or in inverted commas again, rain by means of the dew. And he sent the quails to just come in, right? If you recall, in Egypt, he didn't send quails. He sent locusts. He sent frogs. All these were pests to the Egyptians and made their lives miserable. But here, he sent quails who just, decided to just fly right in front of the Israelites and just stand there and wait for the Israelites to catch them, right? This really shows the great difference between God caring for the people versus God teaching a lesson for the Egyptians. Okay, so point number 3, we learn to trust Him day by day and not to take things into our own hands by hoarding. Right? Hoarding is a general word to say you are afraid of what you may lose in the future or what you may not have in the future, and so you keep first. Right? I think maybe some of us here are also guilty of hoarding things from, 30 years ago, 40 years ago for memory's sake, but we may not necessarily use them or touch them. Right? So what were they guilty of hoarding? They were guilty of hoarding in case God didn't rain the manna, in case the quails didn't fly in. And so they decided, let's keep more than what I need for the day. But that's not the way that God works, right? God wants us to rely on Him. God wants us to know that there is nothing to worry about because He will take care of us. And if we go back all the way to Genesis, and in the beginning, the serpent told Eve in the Garden of Eden, hey Eve, it's okay to eat the forbidden fruit. Why? Because you will be like God. You will understand good and evil. But the key text here that I want to focus is, be like God. Right? So, when you are like God, what does it mean? It means that you are in control. And that is exactly what has happened to Eve, where now she decided to be like God and she wants to be in control. And of course, humans today, we also want to be in control. Many of us don't like to be not in control of our lives, right? Imagine for us who are working, if our bosses call us at 11:30 p.m. and say, hey, can you do this, can you do that? Then it's like, you feel that you're not controlling your life. You want to sleep, but your boss calls you. You want to be in control whereby, 6 p.m. knockoff means nobody calls me, right? That is in being in control. But can that really happen? Well, we will, I guess each of us have our own issues at work. But the idea here is the Israelites wanted to be in control. And of course, that goes directly against relying on God. The parable of the rich fool in Luke chapter 12, where a certain rich man, he said that, wow, I had a barn, it's overflowing, let me just tear it down, build a bigger one, because my harvest is so full. And of course, God says, well, don't be foolish. You could just lose your life the next day. What are all these riches for? So, in this little text, Jesus actually told the people, there is no need to worry about your life, because if you trust in God to take care of you, He takes care of the pigeons and the ravens, right, who fly around. You don't even know how they get fed, but somehow they do. And what more is your worth as compared to these birds of the air? And later on, in verse 32 to 34 of Luke chapter 12, Jesus also adds, you should lay up your treasure in heaven. Because when you start hoarding things, when you start laying up your treasures on earth, you forget what the true purpose of your life on earth is, which is to lay up treasures in heaven. Because what is the point? Like in the story of the parable of the rich fool, what's the point if you have the biggest barn in the whole city, and the next day, you may leave this earth and you have nothing. Right? So Jesus' point was, there is really no need to worry about your life if you have the belief that God is in charge of it all. So Exodus 17. Exodus 17, I think the Bible didn't say what was the exact timeline, but I would think it's probably another few more months or something, a few more weeks or some more months, where there was a complaint of thirst. And this time, I think as we know in science, right, man can probably live without food for a while, but if you have no water, you probably will die earlier. So in terms of severity, thirst is probably more critical, more severe than hunger. And we can see here, the level of complaints now have escalated. Israel is now even ready to stone Moses, the man who led them out from Egypt, for leading them to a place to die of thirst. So previously in chapter 15, they grumbled. Moses, water is bitter, can you help? Okay, fine. 16, Moses, no food, also no meat. Okay, fine. But of course they did something wrong, guys, don't do it. Okay, can. Now 17, when you come to Exodus 17, it becomes even, it's really terrible, right? Moses, I'm going to stone you because I have no water. And they even use descriptions now saying, my children are involved, my animals are involved. Right? These descriptions were not used earlier on. Right? Previously it was just Moses, we just needed this. So you could really tell that they were really, really desperate, and the complaints and troubles have escalated to a very high degree. And they even asked the key question here in verse 7 of Exodus 17. Is the Lord among us or not? This is the instance where I think it really raises, or really it becomes very clear that Israel has a lot of doubt about God. They really doubted God helping them in their midst of trouble. The level of faith that they have, even though God has done all these things, and remember, God has been providing manna and quail every day. And yet, when it comes to a point of thirst or lack of water, they can even say, is the Lord among us or not? They just cannot think of God being the provider, right? But that being said, God still provided them. And provided them from the most unlikely of sources, from a rock. The conventional wisdom is, okay, you have a rock. How is the rock ever going to produce water? But, lo and behold, all Moses needed to do, tap the rock, and boom, water came out from the rock. So this was yet another miracle that the Israelites saw. But they took it for granted again. It's like, okay, fine, after you have provided for me, and I am seemingly full and satisfied, they forget about God. They failed to see that the glory of God was still there. Then the next part of Exodus 17 talks about the fight against the Amalekites. Now this is a slightly different slant from what I have mentioned in the past 10 minutes or so. But it really shows again the need to trust in God. Now the fight against the Amalekites is interesting because the Amalekites were descendants of course, Amalek, right? That's where they come from. And Amalek was the son of Eliphaz, who was likely the firstborn son of Esau. And if we go back to Genesis 28, we'll recall that Jacob had just supplanted Esau as the owner of the rights of their father. And Esau thus said, I will kill Jacob. And Jacob in this sense was Israel. So the Bible is silent on how Esau actually managed his family. But if you just think of it in modern day terms, if you harbor such a hatred against somebody, you probably will share it with your, descendants, right? Or your descendants will get to know about it. it came to pass that, the grandson Amalek of Esau, his descendants suddenly attacked Israel. So this is the first attack on Israel after they had left Egypt. And the curious thing is, God actually made it such that as long as Moses lifted up his hands, the fight for Israel would be, or rather the fight will be, put it the other way, Israel will prevail in the fight at that point in time. But if his hands were down, Israel will lose, or the Amalekites will be winning at the point in time. So it became such that Aaron had to help his brother Moses to continue to lift up his hands. And this was a very interesting miracle, if you ask, if you read through the chapter, because nothing is being said about who has the more powerful weapons, who were the fitter ones, who were the smarter ones. No such thing. It was just a matter of willpower and the faith, and probably the leader, in this case Moses, who is able to hold up his hands and to endure the strain of it all, in order to let the people of Israel prevail and not die at the hands of the Amalekites. So this again shows that it doesn't matter whether the Amalekites were stronger, it doesn't matter whether the Amalekites were better prepared, they ambushed and had a surprise upper hand over Israel. It doesn't matter, right? Because it said that after the entire skirmish, Israel was considered the victor, and Amalekites had to retreat. And the Lord after that also declared war against Amalek. Right, so the quick learnings from Exodus 17. As we grow, the bar will be raised. Right? As we grow, the bar will be raised. As we grow in faith, our faith deepens. The evil one, Satan, will definitely be more empowered to test us even more. Right? If you look at it from an evil standpoint, if you are already on the dark side, why do I even bother to go and make you even darker? But if you're on the bright side, I better work on you to change you to the dark side. Yeah? So, the more that you're on the bright side, the evil one is going to go after you more strongly, more fervently, and thus the bar will be raised. And that prolonged suffering leads to frustration and potentially doubt. I mean, these are feelings, and these are natural feelings that will occur. But we must always remember that God will provide. In 1 Corinthians, it's written, we will never be tempted beyond what we can bear. Right? God will not allow Satan to tempt us beyond what we can bear to the point that we will collapse and we'll give up. No, God will not allow that. But it will get harder just because our threshold increases. Again, if you look from a young person growing up, say a little baby, he probably can't do any push-ups. A young boy maybe can do 1 push-up. By the time he goes to NS, he's doing 20 push-ups every time the sergeant asks him to do it, right? So it gets tougher and tougher as he grows. But he will never. As we mentioned here, God will always set the limit, and also put the exit for us to take, if we choose to take it. Because we can always go back to our past, as Brother Bing Chuan mentioned. It is so easy to slip back and think about what we did last time was always better, right? The sinful nature is always more fun, always better, always easier. It's so much easier to hate your enemy than to love your enemy, right? You could just shout back, fight back, say bad things, put a knife through, than asking your enemy to go out for dinner, asking your enemy how does he feel today. It doesn't work like that typically, right? In the world around us. So we will always have to remind ourselves constantly that no matter how difficult the suffering, God will always be there. And we were all on our own paths of, we all have our own thresholds. Meaning to say, our level of faith differs from person to person. And we must all understand this as well. Because sometimes it could be that we may also dismiss a certain problem or tragedy as trivial because we have been through it. But that's not the case, because we are all at different levels of our thresholds. Now, the second point here, Jesus is our intercessor who speaks to God directly and helps us to deliver us from the enemy. So, like Moses in Exodus 17, Moses was the intercessor of sorts, right? Moses just did this, raise up his hands, and they will always win. In the same case, in the same light, Jesus is also the one who died on the cross for us, and he's the one who speaks to God directly for us. He's the one who tells God, yes, the people are grumbling, but I understand them. Please help. Please do this. Please do that. And God, through Jesus, will deliver us from our enemies. The last point I would like to add here is a gentle reminder, if that's a correct phrase to use, that God will always, or rather, God has said that he will destroy his enemies, like the battle against the Amalekites. So this reminder here is to say that we need to make sure that we are on the side that we will win. We will need to make sure to stay the course and finish the race, and not to fall out and lose the crown and lose the prize at the end of the race. We need to make sure that we're on the side that will eventually win. Now, I use the word eventually because sometimes, like Moses, sometimes his hands may fall. And it will look like, oh no, we are losing. But is that really the case? That is something that we really should ask ourselves. Is that really the case? Because you may, as the phrase goes, you may lose the battle, or rather, you may win the battle but lose the war. Right? Or you can lose the battle and still win the war. So we need to make sure that we are on the side that will eventually win. You may be down for that while, because in the case of the Israelites, maybe they were charging towards the Amalekites. At that moment, Moses really was very tired. He put his hands down, and then when he was about to thrust his spear, perhaps he missed. And then he's like, "Hey, how come I missed?" But it could be because, at that moment, things just didn't go your way. But later on, the Israelites still prevailed. And that's the important part to remember. So, in conclusion, trouble comes to all mankind, especially in this period of COVID-19. Now, I do not want to trivialize COVID-19 and its impact. I think it has had tremendous impact. Whether is it, I don't know, online fatigue, COVID-19 fatigue of being cooped up at home, or the more serious things like loss of jobs, loss of livelihoods. I think these are very serious issues that we may not be able to understand each other's problems that well. But what I can generalize is this, that all of these troubles come, and the difference between Christians and non-Christians is the way that we approach these problems. I say again, trouble comes to all mankind, but the difference between Christians and non-Christians is the way that we approach these troubles. Because when trouble comes, James tells us, we should rejoice. Tribulations come, we should rejoice. This is totally out of whack from what the world teaches us. The world teaches us, trouble comes, better save yourself. Before the trouble comes, better also save yourself, right? Start hoarding already. But the Bible doesn't tell us that. The Bible tells us to rely on God and to rejoice in tribulations. Because when we are tested, the same way that gold is tested in the fire. So maybe I just go off tangent a little while. In a furnace, back in the day, the furnace is the hot boiling cauldron where they will try to extract gold. And if my chemistry serves me well, I think gold has the highest melting point or lowest, either one, that you can actually burn everything else, and what is left is the gold. So that was how they managed to extract gold back in the past. So using this analogy, our testing of our faith is the same as the testing of gold in the furnace. Everything shall be burnt. But if your heart is truly made of pure gold, you shall stand the test of the furnace. And this is exactly the reason why James, as I read earlier, in James chapter 1, verse 2-4, that the testing of our faith produces patience, and that patience makes us perfect and complete. This is the truth. This is the full story and the complete picture that we as Christians should try to understand, to encourage us. I think that is the best word to use. To encourage us that no matter how down you are, the chips are down, definitely, but there is no way that the Lord will abandon you, right? The Lord could have just let them die in the wilderness, let the Israel die in the wilderness of sin, but He didn't. He sent quail, He sent manna, He asked Moses, tap on the rock, speak to the rock, water came out. He provided for them every single day. No need to hoard, no need to do anything else. So that's the reason why we should rejoice that God provides the way out. As long as we have the bread of life daily, as long as we obey the commands and statutes of the Lord and trust in His providence, what we need is just the bread of life daily. And on this note, I will also encourage all of us to continually read our Bible, because that is truly the bread of life that we have today. Reading our Bible daily becomes an absolute minimum. And it is this is my own personal testimony, reading the Bible. It is just very odd how things can just come into play by reading a random section of the Bible. I would just share that in my family, we don't read randomly. We try to read from book end to book end. So I think as of the last night we were at 1 Samuel. Okay, and you might ask, what does 1 Samuel got to do with your life today, right? Or later on, maybe last or 2 weeks ago, I read Ruth. So what has Ruth got to do with your life today? But the question here is not whether a particular passage in the Bible has a relevance to your life, but rather, how did reading of the Bible give you the idea that God is here, gave you the idea and the assurance that God will provide? If I now speak about Ruth was just some random Moabite, not even an Israelite, right? A Moabite who later become one of the ancestors of Christ Himself. Like, how did this even happen, right? And it really tells us that, maybe for a non-Christian, it would tell us that, well, even though she wasn't an Israelite, she got married into the whole Israelite chain. And as a non-Christian, you could also become a Christian and receive the crown of life at the end of the race, right? These are very random things that I may not be able, or no one may really be able to show you or share with you how do all these things actually happen. But the fact of the matter is, as long as we read the bread of life daily, the Bible daily, it will come to us. Miracles do not happen today, but God, through the Holy Spirit, is still working today. And the question is, whether do you believe it or not? What is the level of faith? Do you have the faith of the mustard seed that can move the mountain? Or your faith is not even a speck of dust, that you always have to keep relying on yourselves? So I leave you with this thought, that we will always have trials and tribulations. This is a fact. And Jesus Himself also told His disciples, for my name, all of you apostles, you will suffer. Right? But in the bigger picture, or maybe in today's context, we may not have so much oppression or any kind of physical negativity towards us. But the facts are still there. Tribulations still come. Trials are still ever present. What is our approach? What is our response to it? And I would like to give the answer. To trust and to obey. To trust in the Lord with all our hearts and lean not on our own understanding, but in all ways acknowledge the Lord, and He will keep our path straight. Proverbs 3:5-6. To obey Him, to know that if He tells you, don't go and pick manna on the seventh day, don't go and take more than you can, you just do it. Don't ask why. Ask why for what? There's no reason, right? God has His own way. You should just obey that way. So this is the invitation that I would like to reach out to all of us Christians here. And to if there may be any non-Christians among us, the invitation is also out. That in this time of trouble, or doesn't mean in this time, in all times of trouble, the way that a Christian and a non-Christian reacts is always going to be different. Because the non-Christian does not have Christ, whereas the Christian does. And the Christian knows that God will always provide and God will always save. And it's with this that I would like to leave this thought as we sing the invitation song.